Dear students, welcome to the class on sampling. So I guess you have heard this name earlier in your Eco 201 or Eco 202 course. It is related to statistics mainly, alright? However, I'm going to briefly discuss this topic in this video because we will need to do sampling in our research project, alright? So in today's lesson plan, I'm going to show you the difference between sample and population. I'm going to also discuss what is sampling, and finally, why do we need to do sampling? Again, I'm sure you have gone through all of these in earlier courses related to statistics, alright? However, I'm going to briefly cover all of these topics. Now, before we start, just to give you an idea, in the last video, we discussed types of research or research design. So we are done with this topic. Now in today's video, we are going to start our discussion on data collection techniques. Alright. So the first topic under data collection technique is sampling procedures. So we are going to start our discussion on that. So we are going to discuss which sampling technique to use, what is the sample size going to be, and all of these issues. So let's start now. For today's lesson purpose, we are going to focus on this research. Remember, from the very first videos, we chose this topic for our understanding purpose. So Generation Z and its digital media consumption patterns. So we are going to find out how to do sampling for this research project. So let's move on. So let's start our discussion with population. What do we mean by population? Now again, I'm going to briefly cover this topic, alright? Because I'm not supposed to cover in detail what do we mean by population, what is sample in this course. Because you have gone through all of these in other courses. So again, it is going to be a brief discussion. So yes, what do we mean by population? Again, let's start with the formal definition first. The entire group of individuals related to a research topic is called the population. Again, the boring definition, I know it's confusing. Don't worry, I'm going to explain it briefly with an example. For example, how frequently do Black students go to Chilox? Let's assume this is one of my research questions. Now, for this study, what can be the population that I should work on? Can you make a guess? Yes, you have guessed it right. For this study or the question, the population is all the students of BRACU. Why? Because this entire group of individuals is related to my research project. I'm asking something about all the students of BRACU. So that's why for this question, the population is all the students of BRAC University. So now let's move on to the second example. Now, if I ask you this question, what is the population for the Generation Z digital media study? I have just shown you the research topic in the earlier slide, right? So what can be the population for the Generation Z digital media study again? Let's think for 10 seconds here and try to come up with the answer. Yes, you have got it right. The population for this study is all the people belonging to Generation Z, because we are going to do a study on Generation Z people here, right? So that's why all the people in the world, in the whole world who belongs to Generation Z belongs to my population as well. Okay, so I have briefly explained the concept of population. Just to mention, I have not gone through this concept thoroughly here because I assume that you have gone through this concept of population and sample in earlier courses. I'm repeating this again and again. Now let's move on to the next topic, which is census. What is the census? I'm sure many of you have heard of it before because you have obviously heard of population census, right? Which is also known as Adamshumari. Now, this Adamshumari is one kind of census, alright? So, let's move on to the broader definition. What do we mean by census in general? So, here is the bookish definition again. A census is a survey conducted on the full set of observation or objects belonging to a given population or universe. Again, the wordings are very difficult. Don't worry, I'm explaining it again. So, in a census, What do we need to do is we need to collect data from every single person that belongs to my research population. Again, collect data from every single person belonging to my research population. Let's move on to the example again. So, for example, how frequently do BRACU students go to Chilox? What was the population here? All the students of BRACU, if you remember. Now, how can we do census for this research question? Here it goes. For this question, collecting data or doing a survey on all the students of BRACU is done via census. So that is the census for this research. Doing a survey on every single student of BRACU. Now in that survey, we can ask them that how many times do you go to Chilox every week or every month, right? So that is how we can collect data from every single student of BRACU. And that will be called a census. Alright, now let's move on to the next example. Here it goes. What is a census for the Generation Z digital media study? Yes, you guessed it right. If I send a survey to every single person in the world who belongs to the Generation Z cohort, then I would have called it a census for this study. And in that survey, I could have asked them what is the number of hours that you spend every day on digital media. So that would have been a census. Alright, I guess by now you have learned the concept of population and census. However, there is a huge problem in working with these two concepts, population and census. What is the problem? Here it goes. There are more than 1 billion people belonging to Generation Z cohort all over the world. Now, I'm sure some of you here are doing a study on this topic, like the Generation Z cohort and their digital media consumption patterns. Now, if I ask you to send a survey to every single Generation Z person in the world, is it possible? Can you do that? You will die doing that task, alright? It will take years, it will take a lot of money, a lot of effort, right? So we never do that. So rather than sending out the question or the survey to every single person in the world, we rely on something else. So again, we do not rely on the whole population or the census. Rather, we rely on something else for this purpose. What is that? It is a sample. So rather than relying on the whole population, we rely on a sample oftentimes. What is a sample? Here goes the definition. A sample dataset contains a part or a subset of a population. So again, we are not going to pick every single person that belongs to a population. Rather, we are going to select few people or a part from that population. And together, that part will be called a sample. For example, how frequently do BRACU students go to Chilox? Again, the same research question. So for this study, what can be a possible sample that we can work on? Now there are thousands of BRACU students, right? So the population is really big. Now rather than sending out the survey to every single BRACU students, what can we do here? Here we can select only 50 students from the whole population. So rather than sending out the survey to all the BRACU students, we select only 50 students among them. And in that case, this group of 50 students will be called a sample. So again, this sample is a subsection or a subset of the whole population. Alright, now let's move on to the next example. What might be a sample for the Generation Z digital media study? Rather than sending out this survey to 1 billion Generation Z people all over the world, maybe we can select only 1,000 people who belongs to Generation Z, and that 1,000 people together will be called a sample. Alright? Now, for your ease of understanding, let me explain this whole concept in a picture here. Here it goes. Let's assume this is a population of all the people who belongs to Generation Z. Alright? So here we have 1 billion people, let's say. And this is my whole population. Now, rather than selecting every single person from this population, we select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people only. And these 5 people together is called a sample here. Again, these 5 people together is going to be called a sample. Now, once we have the sample, what can we do with that? We can send out the survey to these 5 people only. Alright? I guess by now the concept of population and sample is somewhat clear to you. So what is the difference between a sample and a population? I guess by now it's clear. So I'm going to move on to the next concept. However, this concept is very, very crucial. Alright? So please listen to me very carefully for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Here comes the next concept. Element or case. So what is an element or a case? The term element refers to an individual person or an individual object. It refers to a single value within the sample database. Again, it might be very confusing, the definition. Don't worry, just listen to me for 2 minutes. For example, we are conducting a research using a sample of university students. So in the earlier example, we picked 50 students, right? 50 BRACU students. That was our sample. Now within that sample, every single university student would be an element or a case. So again, in the earlier study, we chose 50 BRACU students. Those 50 students together was my sample. But within those 50 students, every single student individually will be called an element or a case. Let me explain this with the picture again. So here is the population. And from this population, we picked 5 people, and these 5 people together was called my sample. And now, within this 5 people, every single person individually is called an element or a case. So this person is an element, this person is an element, this person is another element, this person is another, and finally this person is also an element or a case. So we have 5 elements or 5 cases here. So again, 5 people together is called a sample, and within that sample, every single person individually is called an element or a case. So I guess by now from this picture, it is clear to you what do we mean by population, what do we mean by sample, and what do we mean by element or a case. Now let's move on to the next concept, which is sampling. It is very, very easy. What is sampling? Sampling is the process of selecting elements from the study population. So again, it is just the process of selecting elements or cases from the population. Do not worry, it will be explained in much more detail in the next class. The next whole class is based on the concept of sampling. So there, I'm going to show you what are the different ways or different processes we can use to select 50 students out of 2000 students, or 1000 Generation Z people from 1 billion Generation Z people. So in the next class, we are going to cover all the different processes that we can follow to select an element or a case from a huge population. For now, this definition is enough only. Just keep in your mind that sampling refers to the process of selecting elements from a population. Now the last concept of today, statistical inference. It sounds very fancy, right? And very difficult. It is a bit tricky, and this is the last concept for today. So please pay attention, all right? Look at this circular diagram here. If you understand this diagram, then the concept of statistical inference will be crystal clear to you. So let's go through this circle point by point. So let's start here. The population, all of the individuals of interest. So we start with the population first. We know what is our population. Population consists of all the individuals related to our topic, right? So let's assume there are 20,000 BRACU students, and all of these 20,000 BRACU students belong to my population. Now in the next step, a sample is selected from this population. So from this 20,000 BRACU students, from this whole population, I selected only 50 students, and that is my sample. All right. So the second step is done as well. Next, the sample, the individuals selected to participate in the research study. So after I have selected 50 students, I send out a survey to them, I request them to fill it up, and they send it back to me. So that is how I collected the survey from each of them, and ultimately they participated in my research. So all of the 50 students participate in my research study by filling in the survey. Now, these three steps are really easy, right? The main point is here regarding the last step. We need to understand this very carefully. And this is related to statistical inference. So again, we are done with these three steps. So till the third step, I have received the surveys from 50 BRACU students. Now here is the last step. The results from the sample are generalized to the population. In order to understand this step, let me go to the next slide. All right. By looking at the next slide, this point will be crystal clear to you. So here it goes. What do we mean by generalizing the sample results? Let's assume that I have received the survey results from 50 BRACU students. And here is the result. So according to the survey results collected from 50 BRACU students, I found out that among the 50 students, 45 go to Chilox at least once every 14 days. So that is the result I got from where? From the sample of 50 students. Now, I have the sample result. Now, sometimes I can generalize this sample result for the whole population. Don't get confused, I'm explaining right now. What do we mean by generalizing? Generalizing means this. From this result, so from the sample result, we can say that most of the students of BRACU go to Chilox once every 14 days. So what did I do here? Whatever the result I got from the sample, based on that result, I can say more or less the same thing for the whole population as well. And that is called generalizing the sample result to the whole population. Again, whatever result I got from the sample, I can say more or less the same thing about the whole population as well sometimes. So here I am assuming that if I had collected data from the whole population, I would have got similar kind of result. So I collected data from 50 people only, but I am assuming that if I had collected data from the whole population, from all the BRACU students, I would have got similar kind of result. And that is called generalizing the sample result to the whole population. And the textbook term for this whole concept is called statistical inference. So statistical inference is the act of generalizing the result from a sample to a population. So again, generalizing the result to a population is called statistical inference. So this is the textbook terminology. So just to make it a little bit easier for you, here is the whole process in a simple diagram. So what do we have here? So I start with the population. I know the population. Then I do sampling from that population and I get the sample. Now I send out a survey to all the people in my sample. I collect data from them. I have the result. And once I have the result from the sample, I generalize this result to the whole population. And that is called statistical inference. So what is statistical inference once again? Generalizing the sample result to a whole population. Let me give you one last example regarding generalizing sample results or statistical inference. Let's go back to the Generation Z digital media consumption study. Remember, we selected 1,000 people as my sample from 1 billion people worldwide. So we have 1,000 people as my sample. Now let's assume we sent out a survey to them. Now after collecting the survey, let's assume we got this result. Among the 1,000 Generation Z people, 80% spend at least 2 hours on Netflix and Facebook. So where did we get this result? From the sample of 1,000 Generation Z people. Now how can we do statistical inference here? By doing this. So we can generalize the result to the population. How? By saying Majority of the people in Generation Z spend at least 2 hours on Netflix and Facebook. So whatever the result I got from the sample, I'm assuming more or less the same thing for the whole population as well. So we can do this sort of statistical inference sometimes. So yes, finally we are done with this video. So in this video we discussed what is a population, what is a census, what is a sample, and what is sampling. And finally we discussed the concept of statistical inference. Alright, we are done here. So we are done with today's class. In the next class, we are going to have a look at the different sampling techniques. What are the different processes we can use to select a sample from a whole population? Till then, stay safe, stay healthy.